From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
The devastation is, I don't have the words for it. It's really horrific. It's a great human tragedy. There's no power, there's no light. By the time the sun sets, it's dark, and you're just going to have to make your way to where you can find some shelter.
More than 10,000 people are feared dead after one of the strongest typhoons in world history devastates the Philippines. We'll get live reports from the Philippines and go to Poland, where the UN Climate Change Summit has just opened up. We'll speak with Yeb Sanyo, the chief climate negotiator of the Philippines. He just announced he'll go on a hunger fast until the UN takes action. A year ago, he delivered an emotional appeal to the world.
I appeal to the leaders from all over the world to open our eyes to the stark reality that we face. I appeal to ministers. The outcome of our work is not about what our political masters want. It is about what is demanded of us by 7 billion people. I appeal to all, please, no more delays, no more excuses.
And as we mark Veterans Day, we'll speak with Ann Jones, author of They Were Soldiers, How the Wounded Return from America's Wars, The Untold Story. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. More than 10,000 people are feared dead in the central Philippines following one of the most powerful typhoons ever recorded. Nearly 1,000 people are confirmed dead so far, but the toll is expected to rise. Typhoon Haiyan sent huge waves that inundated towns, washed ships ashore, and swept away coastal villages. More than 600,000 people have been displaced. Many still have no access to food, to water, or medicine. Relief workers are struggling to reach survivors cut off by flooded roads. The city of Tacloban was described as a scene of massive devastation, with bodies scattered in the streets and buried under flattened buildings. We'll have more on the typhoon after headlines. Nuclear talks between Iran and 6 world powers have ended without a deal in place. The two sides were reportedly close to reaching a short-term agreement that would see a limited relief of sanctions on Iran in return for a slowdown of its nuclear activities. But the pact collapsed after France refused to sign on. On Sunday, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani said his government will never abandon its right to enrich uranium.
We have shown those on the other side of the negotiations, both verbally and through our actions, that threats, sanctions, belittling, and discrimination will not work, not under any circumstances. For us, they are red lines that cannot be crossed. The rights of the Iranian nation are our red lines. National interests are our red lines, and that includes our rights under the framework of international regulations and enrichment on Iranian soil.
Despite the apparent breakdown, both sides say progress was made and have agreed to resume meetings in Geneva next week. Secretary of State John Kerry said the two sides are closer to an agreement than before.
We are closer now as we leave Geneva than we were when we came, and that with good work and good faith over the course of the next weeks, we can, in fact, secure our goal. We came to Geneva to narrow the differences. And I can tell you without any exaggeration, we not only narrowed differences and clarified those that remain, but we made significant progress in working through the approaches to this question of how one reins in a program and guarantees its peaceful nature.
Speaking today in Abu Dhabi, Kerry said he expects an agreement with Iran within the next several months. But even as the talks progress, a bipartisan group of lawmakers is moving ahead with plans for a vote on tightening anti-Iran sanctions. Meanwhile, in Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu continued his public campaign against an Iran nuclear deal with a speech to supporters.
It's a bad and dangerous deal that deals with a thing that affects our survival. And when it comes to the question of Jewish survival and the survival of the Jewish state, I will not be silenced, ever. Not on my watch.
In a move that will bolster the talks next week, Iran says it's reached an agreement with the UN's nuclear agency to expand international monitoring. The deal will give the International Atomic Energy Agency greater access to Iranian sites, including its heavy water reactor. Speaking during a visit to Iran, the IAEA chief, Yukaya Amano, said the inspections roadmap will be implemented over the next 3 months. In other news from Iran, the country's deputy minister of industry has been shot dead in Tehran. It was the first known killing of a top Iranian official in years. The UN's annual climate summit begins today in Warsaw, Poland. A binding agreement on tackling global warming is off the table, with negotiators focused on reaching a deal for 2015. On the eve of the summit, a group of environmentalists staged a protest in central Warsaw.
Climate change is impacting on hunger and food production. So we're here at the start of the climate talks in Warsaw to call on governments to urgently take action on climate change. We want to see emissions reduced, and we want to see money for poor people in developing countries to be able to adapt and cope with the impacts of climate change that they're feeling right now.
Tune in next week. From Monday to Friday, Democracy Now! Will be broadcasting live from the UN Climate Summit in Warsaw, Poland. At least 5 people have been killed in 2 reported U.S. drone strikes in Yemen. The victims were described as suspected al-Qaeda militants in the southern province of Abyan. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, hundreds of people rallied in multiple cities Friday to protest the U.S. drone war. Demonstrators in the city of Peshawar staged a massive sit-in blocking a NATO supply line. The action followed the strike that killed the head of the Pakistani Taliban, Hakimullah Masood, earlier this month, jeopardizing peace talks with the Pakistani government. In an interview, Pakistani opposition leader Imran Khan accused the U.S. of undermining a chance for peace.
If there was a chance of peace talks, we should have grabbed it. And I'm afraid, while the Interior Minister did his best, I'm afraid I'm really disappointed in the way the Prime Minister has taken this whole peace process, because this should have been his #1 priority. I think that the Americans basically could have taken out Hakimullah whenever they wanted. I think that the timing was to sabotage the peace process.
Clashes have erupted in Saudi Arabia amidst a crackdown on foreign workers. The Saudi government began arresting thousands of people last week after an amnesty period for workers without visas expired. At least 2 people were killed and dozens injured after police confronted workers on Saturday. Meanwhile, in Qatar, a UN expert is calling for reforms in the labor conditions of foreign workers. Francois Crepeau, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights of Migrants, said guest workers in Qatar are being housed in squalor.
I've seen dwellings by migrant workers, and these are slums. And I think this is a stain in the reputation of Qatar, which is the richest country per capita. I think Qatar should not tolerate slums to be created on its territory. And there are means of making this better, probably relatively quickly.
Qatar has the world's highest proportion of migrant workers, with 90% of the workforce coming from outside the country. The country is hosting soccer's World Cup in 2022. Thousands of people rallied in Greece Sunday following a police raid on the state's broadcaster. Employees of ERT had remained in their offices since June, when the station was abruptly shut down, part of a series of cost-cutting moves demanded by international creditors. But the ERT workers were finally evicted last week when riot police broke into the network and cleared it room by room. On Sunday, Greece's ruling party survived a censure vote over the raid brought by the opposition. 2 people were killed and at least 22 others wounded in Houston, Texas Saturday when gunfire broke out at a house party. Around 100 people were inside the home when the shooting began. A police spokesperson briefed reporters on the victims.
What I can tell you right now is we have 2 confirmed killed. 1 was confirmed at the hospital, 1 was confirmed here at the scene. We have a 3rd gunshot victim at Memorial Hermann Medical Center that is undergoing surgery. I don't have the status on that victim yet. We have an additional 15 other victims, varying degrees of non-life-threatening gunshot wounds, from grazings to bullet wounds into legs, ankles, that sort of stuff.
New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg has asked a federal appeals court to vacate a judge's rulings against the New York City Police Department's controversial stop-and-frisk program. In August, U.S. District Judge Shira Shinlin found stop-and-frisk unconstitutional, saying police had relied on a policy of indirect racial profiling targeting blacks and Latinos. Judge Shinlin appointed a federal court monitor to oversee a series of reforms, but a three-judge panel froze the reforms and removed Judge Shinlin last month, saying she'd violated judicial standards. On Saturday, the Bloomberg administration said Judge Shinlin's decision should be permanently undone. Bloomberg's successor, Bill de Blasio, has vowed to withdraw Bloomberg's appeal when he takes office as mayor in January. CBS News has retracted a controversial story on the deadly attack on the U.S. diplomatic site in Benghazi, Libya. In a segment for 60 Minutes that aired last month, security contractor Dylan Davies offered what he called an eyewitness account of the militant raid that killed 4 Americans, including the U.S. ambassador, on September 11, 2012. Davies claimed he rushed to the scene and clubbed a militant attacker with the butt of his rifle. He also said he visited Ambassador Chris Stevens in the hospital. His comments fueled right-wing theories surrounding a lackluster U.S. military response. But Davies' own statements to both the FBI and the firm he worked for, Blue Mountain, undermined his claims. Davies had in fact told investigators he spent most of the night of the attack in his villa. CBS failed to vet Davies' comments for accuracy, despite working on the story for 1 year. After initially standing by the story, 60 Minutes correspondent Lara Logan apologized to viewers.
On Thursday night, when we discovered the account he gave the FBI was different than what he told us, we realized we had been misled, and it was a mistake to include him in our report. For that, we are very sorry. The most important thing to every person at 60 Minutes is the truth. And the truth is, we made a mistake.
Davies was on 60 Minutes to promote his new book, which is published by Simon & Schuster, itself owned by CBS's parent company, Viacom. The book has now been pulled from shelves. In an interview, the chair of CBS News, Jeff Fager, called the report as big a mistake as there has been in 60 Minutes' 5 decades on the air. The watchdog group Media Matters is calling on CBS to form an independent panel to investigate the Benghazi report, as it did with a story about President George W. Bush's service in the Texas Air National Guard. The Bush report led to the ouster of CBS News anchor Dan Rather and several other journalists. The reporter on the Benghazi story, Lara Logan, has previously advocated a forceful response to the Libya attack. In a speech last year, Logan said the U.S. should send in its military forces to exact revenge.
When I look at what's happening in Libya, there's a big song and dance about whether this was a terrorist attack or a protest, and you just want to scream, for God's sake. Are you kidding me? The last time we were attacked like this was the USS Cole, which was a prelude to the 1998 embassy bombings, which was a prelude to 9/11. And you're sending in FBI to investigate. I hope to God that you're sending in your best clandestine warriors who are going to exact revenge and let the world know that the United States will not be attacked on its own soil, that its ambassadors will not be murdered, and the United States will not stand by and do nothing about it.
Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, meanwhile, is maintaining his vow to block all of President Obama's nominations until Benghazi survivors are allowed to appear before Congress. Senator Graham had announced his stance after the CBS report aired, but he now says his position remains unchanged despite the report's retraction. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy.